Today's webinar, titled Collaborating Across Regulatory Programs to Achieve Shared Goals, is the second webinar in a four-part series NUIPIC's providing that builds off of the themes planned for the now postponed National Tanks Conference, which was rescheduled for September of 2021. Please be on the lookout for future announcements related to the webinar series and the 2021 National Tanks Conference. For today's session, attendees will learn about the impact of hydrostatic sump testing across Pennsylvania's UST, LUST, and state fund programs. We'll hear about how cross-training within New Hampshire's Oil Remediation and Compliance Bureau has facilitated cohesion, strength, and growth. Finally, we will hear about the development of South Carolina's GIS internal viewer, see a live demonstration of the tool, and learn how each section of the state's UST program uses the tool to forward their work. In the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel, you'll find a copy of the slides for today's presentation. NUIPIC will be posting the slides as well as the webinar recording to our online archive for future use. After the completion of today's webinar, you'll be automatically prompted to an evaluation form. Thanks in advance for providing your feedback. An electronic certificate of attendance will be emailed to the address used to register for this webinar. And please note that today's presentation has not been evaluated to meet any continuing education requirements. With that, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Kris Shiffer is currently employed with Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, Division of Storage Tanks, as the Division Chief. Prior to his current position, Kris was Section Chief for the UST and the AST Technical Section, a Regional Tank Supervisor for the Pennsylvania DEP South Central Region, and a Field Inspector for the Pennsylvania DEP Storage Tank Program. Kris believes in setting a goal and taking action to achieve it rather than waiting for events to happen. He stands by the quote, "The biggest communication problem is we do not listen to understand, we listen to reply." Welcome, Kris. Suzanne Connelly is a project manager with the Petroleum Remediation section of the Oil Remediation and Compliance Bureau for New Hampshire's Department of Environmental Services. She has an environmental science degree from Franklin Pierce College. During her time employed with New Hampshire DES since 2007, Suzanne has worked as an inspector of above ground and underground storage tanks. She's been the UST Operator Training Specialist, and she currently works as a Petroleum Remediation Project Manager. Her experience amongst all these programs has made her the ideal voice of how these programs work together to help prevent and address releases to the environment. Welcome, Suzanne. And finally, Meredith Love graduated from the University of South Carolina with Bachelor of Science degrees in Geological Sciences and German. She's currently serving as a project manager in South Carolina's Department of Health and Environmental Controls Underground Storage Tank Division in the Corrective Action and Field Support section. She helps lead the GIS initiative within the UST division. Welcome, Meredith, and welcome to all of our panelists. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and begin today's presentations with our first speaker. I'm happy to introduce everyone to Kris Shiffer with Pennsylvania DEP. I'm gonna go ahead and change controls to you, Kris. And you should be good to go whenever you're ready, sir.
All right. Thank you, Drew, and thanks everyone for joining in today. As you heard what Drew said, I hope through these presentations of the three presenters that we have today, you will see that even though that we have the prevention side, the corrective action side, as well as the insurance side of the storage tank program and the storage tank world, you will see that there is much overlap and much to be gained about knowing all aspects of the three programs within the storage tank career path. So again, as Drew said, my name is Kris Shiffer. I am the Division Chief for Pennsylvania Storage Tank Program. So let's first talk about containment sump testing. Many of us are probably guilty of saying the same phrase over and over again as we're explaining it to the regulated community. But we've always said, okay, containment sump testing, it's as simple as just filling a bucket with water and seeing if the water comes out. That's all there is to it. But hopefully when we're done with some of these slides, maybe that's not necessarily accurate. So before we get really into the whole idea of testing and the impacts and everything else, we have to understand, okay, what is it? What are the components involved with containment sump testing? So some of us may look at this picture and say, okay, this looks awful familiar. Here we have a typical containment sump. This one is a polyethylene constructed containment sump. We have it filled with some water and our good friend, the total containment flexible underground piping, which serves to convey product from the submersible turbine pump to the dispensers. Here's another containment sump. It looks like we got a problem with this one. Here we have a penetration boot area, and we have some water infiltration getting into the containment sump. This one again is a fiberglass containment sump, and the difference between polyethylene as well as in a fiberglass sump does play a factor as to whether or not necessary repairs can be done at the current moment. So now that we're all on board and we understand, okay, what is a containment sump? What are the requirements that are out there regarding containment sump testing? Well, in 2015, EPA came forth with their federal rulemaking changes, and at that time required containment sumps to be tested, those that are used in terms of interstitial monitoring for piping release detection, to be tested at least every 3 years. And in most states, that also includes testing following any type of repair. How you do that? Well, following federal regulation, most states also say you can either choose a liquid test method, normally, again, what we just talked about, filling a containment sump with water. There are pressure, although currently I am not aware of any pressure testing method that's out there and is commonly in use. However, the regulations do allow it. And also a vacuum test method for containment sumps, which there are several methods associated with the vacuum method. So we now know containment sumps. We now know most states require them to be tested at least every 3 years. But now who performs that test? Is it the employee of the owner or the operator? Is it a trained technician, maybe someone who's certified or been trained by the testing method that they're using? Or in Pennsylvania, do they require some type of third-party certified individual who is licensed based upon their qualifications by the regulatory agency? So these items are important to know in terms of the training level, the expertise in terms of the individual who is performing the test. Now, we always ask the question, is there a form? Some of you remember long time ago, and in some cases not that long, long time into the recent past, getting test results written on the back of an invoice, maybe a scrap piece of paper, varying forms of information coming in. And this can really be confusing in terms of the owner or the operator, the testing individual, and the regulatory agency in terms of, okay, what type of documentation do I need to show? So in Pennsylvania, of course, there's a form. A lot of our forms are mirrored off of PEI, who developed some outstanding testing forms. This one was then used to make a Pennsylvania specific form, which then has all the information that a regulatory agency is necessarily looking for, and it helps to eliminate some of the questions that an individual may have following the test. Facility information, tester information, the test method, there you have hydrostatic, vacuum, pressure, who developed it, as well as what tank number, what containment sump are we actually testing. If you don't have a form out there, I'd highly recommend creating one, and all aspects of the program be familiar to what that form actually conveys. So we have a containment sump. We're now thinking about who actually is out there testing these sumps. What are the different methods involved? But now, in terms of some of the secondary items associated with containment sump testing, we need to know what is a release associated with these systems. So the whole idea of what is a release does vary a little bit by state to state. But in Pennsylvania, the first part of our definition is almost identical to federal regs, as well as many other states that we neighbor. Obviously, spilling, leaking, emitting, discharging, escaping from a storage tank, a regulated substance, into the waters or the soils is a release. Pennsylvania also has a secondary part to that definition where we say that those same conditions, spilling, leaking, discharging into a containment structure or facility, which a containment sump is, that poses an immediate threat to contamination. So in this case, think about if product was in that containment sump and it wasn't for the fact that that containment sump was holding it in, you would have contamination. So in that case, if you have product in a containment sump, it is an immediate threat of contamination, because if the containment sump were to fail, you would have certainly some soil or groundwater contamination. We would also say that as a release. So is this a release? Although we have a submersible turbine pump and we have a lot of dirt, sludge, debris in a containment sump, we have a little bit of water off to the side, and we have our good friend total containment piping forming us a bubblegum bubble right here at the top of inside the containment sump. This would not be a release in Pennsylvania because you don't have product sitting within the containment sump. Or is this a release? Here we actually have product within a containment sump. Again, here's some total containment piping that decided it just could not take it anymore. So it burst, product came out. In this case, this would fit the immediate threat definition part of release. If it wasn't for this containment sump being tight, it would impact the environment around it. So now that we know and we're thinking about containment sumps, what's required, what are the different methods out there, who's doing the test, what is a release, now it's time for the test. So think about right now, this is a picture of a containment sump underneath a dispenser. We see that the penetration boot is in not very good shape. We also see that there's liquid in the dispenser sump in this case. And notice where that liquid is, right at the penetration areas, both of the conduit as well as the product piping that's coming in. Was there product in that water at some point? Possibly. Is there some contaminants in the water that would be above some type of levels? Possibly as well. So when a tester comes to that, and this gets back into whether or not there's a form, we do require them to report what did they see when they arrived. So if a tester were to come to this location and see this, ask yourself, was a visual performed prior to doing the test? Most standards require that. If the visual indicates a failure, so if I take a look at this and I'm the tester and I see the condition of the penetration boot, I would most likely call this an obvious failure visually. So is that failure going to be reported to the regulatory agency? Or in this case, do they pump out the water, they make the repair of the containment sump, or in this case, the penetration boot, they do the subsequent test and say it passes, everything's good, and the regulatory agency doesn't know anything about it. Keep this in mind during a later slide. So if they were to go ahead and do the test, think about the three testing methods that we said about that are allowed by regulation: liquid, pressure, vacuum. Was the actual test completed correctly? Is there a high water table surrounding this containment sump which may impact the test method that was used? Was the correct equipment used for the test method? All these items are needed to know by whether or not the test was done correctly, and maybe some other variables need to be considered. So let's say we went ahead, we did the test. It failed. Now what? What is the requirement to report? So if someone were to go, they would fill this containment sump up with water. Let's just do the most common test with water. And the test fails. Do they report it? What time frame is involved with the reporting? In this case, what are some other conditions that are present at the site? Do we know that? Yes, we have a containment sump that failed. But in this case, take a look at the total containment piping that's located here. In this case, the total containment piping disintegrated to the point where it actually became disconnected from the piping coupling. What do the other containment sumps look like? Is that a concern to the regulatory agency that even though the other containment sumps at the site may have passed, what's the condition of the piping in those containment sumps? Should that be a concern, and do we need to know that and go out to the site to take a visual examination? So let's say it does fail. It is being reported. In terms of suspected or confirmed release, in Pennsylvania, if the containment sump is initially dry or it just contains water and it fails, it would be a suspected release. So they would have to do their investigation within 7 days. If it contained product prior to the test, that is a release. Remember, we talked about that in terms of having product in a containment sump. That fits the immediate threat definition. That in and of itself is a release. If the containment sump actually fails, now we get into whether or not sampling is going to be a requirement. That may depend upon where the actual failure occurs within the containment sump. Is it all the way at the top? Is it at a location where the product may have reached? Those are items that are necessary and needed from a regulatory agency to determine what the proper response would be. What about repairs? Obviously, if the station or the facility owner wants to utilize that piping system again, they're going to have to make some repairs to the containment sump. What standard are they going to follow? All repairs need to be made in accordance with manufacturer's instructions and industry standards or an independent testing laboratory. But if it's the case of a manufacturer's instructions, which manufacturer? The containment sump manufacturer? Or in this case, the stuff that they're filling the hole with manufacturer? That's something that a regulatory agency needs to decide, ideally ahead of time before they're getting the notifications that there's a repair to be made. From an insurance perspective, obviously from a station owner, do you file a claim? Is there any downside to filing a claim? If so, when? What's the time frame? In Pennsylvania, an owner has 60 days to file that claim. So know what your state's requirements. What is that in some states that have private insurance companies? What are the requirements for notifying the insurance company that you may or do have some type of release? And also, what will be covered as part of that release? Sampling, even though maybe no contamination could be discovered, or must there be actual contamination in the environment to have some type of coverage? And if you're the insurance agent, once you receive the claim, or even someone in the corrective action part of the program, what are you going to ask of the facility owner to provide? Well, in Pennsylvania, some of the items that are requested are site maps, site assessments, sampling data. What was in the tank at the time? Tank inventory, tank gauging figures. A history of all repairs and upgrades to the tanks and lines. Remember that one slide that I said about, that when a tester came to the site and just performed a visual examination, if they did not report that, but instead made the repair and did the subsequent test, which hopefully passed, and no reporting was made, 5 years from now, when maybe perhaps that containment sump does fail, and the insurance company is asking for all documentation of repairs, and they see that repair from 5 years ago, indicating that the containment sump was full of water, maybe a little sheen right at the penetration boot, it was repaired, but nothing further was ever done, will that affect the coverage? That's key, and that has happened in the past. Also, we need to know an indication of when that release or potential release was first suspected. Was there an alarm going on when that water or containment or the regulated product was in that containment sump? Those are things that are going to be asked by certainly the insurance adjuster when it's taking a look at it. So let's put it all together. We talked about containment sumps, we talked about testing methods, who does the test, release notification, repairs that need to be made, what's being requested by the insurance company. But think about how our programs are put together. We have the prevention side of the program. We have corrective action side of the program. We also have the insurance side of the program, but all three really overlap. So if you're one of those three individuals in those sections, think about the following items that we're going to review and think, would this be helpful for you to know? So regardless of those three sections, part of the program, would it be helpful to know what type of equipment was actually tested? What does a containment sump look like? What was it made out of? What's in the backfill around it? Pea gravel, perhaps? Most commonly, it will be. What test method was used? There's pros and cons. Each test method has its advantages. Is that particular test method able to be used if there's a high groundwater table? Who performed the test? Is it actually a qualified individual who performed the test? Was there a form? That would be helpful to know regardless of who I work with, corrective action or insurance or prevention. I want to see the form and what was reported at the time of the actual test. So if the test did fail, both visually and actually physically, was it reported in terms of the requirements by the state? Was there a release? Was there a suspected release? If it was only suspected, did the owner or the operator do an adequate suspected release investigation? If they did, what did they do? And then were repairs made to this containment sump? If so, who did those repairs? Was it reported? What repair standard did they follow? And then was an insurance claim filed? That's key, because if it doesn't, and there is contamination that's not covered, from a state's perspective, certainly, it gets into a more difficult type of cleanup. So think about corrective action, prevention, insurance company. All of the items that we just mentioned would certainly be helpful to know. So we said at the beginning of the slides, and in terms of a statement, now I'm going to just reverse it and ask the question. So containment sump testing, is it really as simple as filling a bucket with water and seeing if the water comes out? So with that, here's my contact information. You heard Drew say about that you have copies of the slide presentations. By all means, in the future, if you have any questions or want to share your experiences or just go over an issue, as we're 30-some years into this program, we're always learning. Shoot me an email, give me a call. I'll be glad to discuss. And with that, I'll give it right back to Drew.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Kris, and thanks for inviting the audience to contact you offline. I've already gotten a couple of pretty good questions sent in for Kris as we get to the Q&A later this afternoon. So we'll hold tight on those. Reminder to the audience, please send questions as they pop up in your mind, and we'll keep those on hold until Q&A. So any other questions for Kris, please send them to me, the moderator, and we'll work to field those questions at the end. Well, thank you so much to Kris Shiffer. Thanks for being here and speaking today, and looking forward to asking you some questions in a little bit. So thanks, Kris. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and take controls back and see if we can go ahead and pull up our next presentation. Bear with me. All right. So I'm now happy to go ahead and introduce our second speaker today. Suzanne Connelly is with New Hampshire DES. Please take it away whenever you're ready, Suzanne.
Thank you, Drew. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be able to share with you some of the successes from New Hampshire's Department of Environmental Services. And I want to say a quick thank you first to those who helped assemble and arrange a series of webinars in lieu of the tank conference. There are so many benefits to be had by encouraging communications, and that's exactly what I want to highlight in this presentation. So next slide, please. Although our offices might be a little void of people right now, the flowers are still growing, and we must remember that our mission remains the same as it did before, during and after this pandemic subsides. Today, I'm proud to represent the state workers of my agency and all the amazing work that's done each day to keep our offices running strong. As you can tell, I am very proud of all those people and to be a part of it. And I have no doubt that you all out there, whether you're in a regulatory role as well, or mirroring these practices in the private industry or wherever else, we all are aiming to protect the public health in addition to the environment. Next slide, please. The many years I've spent in this agency has allowed me to bear witness to the successes of overlapping programs, and I would like to showcase some of those key points of how important these interconnections are to the overall life of the site. If our efforts are effective, we will have managed the impacts of contamination at the site, minimized the project's lifespan, and have it all completed with affordable costs. Of course, those are our goals overall. One of my colleagues has a nice tradition of ringing a bell when he closes the site. That somewhere an angel gets its wings. And I think it's great because we take pride in all our collaborative efforts because it all goes towards closing the site someday. If not for those who don't get these practices in place, or I hope that this review will at least serve as a nice reminder to keep up with your efforts to eliminate the spaces that might be growing between the groups. This might be trickier nowadays, I understand, but it's very important that we give it a try. Next slide, please. The first and most obvious of the cross-training programs is the job shadowing. I urge all project managers to go out on some compliance inspections and hear why UST requirements are in place and how the rules evolved over the years. You'll hear things like, before 1998, metal tanks didn't have corrosion protection. Or closure reports before the 90s didn't include soil sampling. Or USTs installed after 1985 were all double-walled tanks, but single-walled tanks were still in operation up until 2015. These time frames can assist a project manager in their file review by identifying potential data gaps and leading them in a direction to where further investigation might be needed. Call me an optimist, but who knows? The soil delineation at the source area might provide you with the data that can help support the closure of the site. At an inspection, project managers can also get a sense of common violations and learn about recognizing compromised equipment that might be due to something like incompatibility. For example, older models of piping were not rated for additives like ethanol, so in result, the pipes degraded and there was a release from the piping system. In New Hampshire, project managers provide oversight at UST closures and removals, so it's important for us to know how to recognize the signs of system failures. Of course, there's no guarantee that one would see equipment in poor condition at an inspection, and we certainly hope it's operating in good condition. But it's the knowledge sharing that I want to highlight. That's what's important for us to keep things fresh in our minds as we continue on with our own tasks. Next slide, please. So I'd like to share with you the story of Alice. She's unexpectedly become a widow and an owner of the gas station that was once her husband's shop. While figuring out how to manage the station with her teenage son, it seems that she hadn't kept up with the daily inventory records, which was a requirement for their single-walled UST. Fortunately, when they got a new supplier company, it was the company's good habit to visit the site and check on the UST system. As they reviewed the automatic tank gauge, there was a red flag that came up. It seemed that the system had lost a significant amount of product. So as they should, next slide please, the supplier notified DES. Matt Jones, the head of the compliance section, played an integral role in communications from here on, because when records confirmed the loss was upwards of 750 gallons, he knew that the facility, having a single-walled tank, that there would have to be a requirement to be followed that the tank immediately goes into permanent closure procedures. Next slide, please. Matt provided guidance to Alice to start researching an engineer to draft up plans for replacement of the USTs, and got her connected with our plan review section. And at the same time, the project manager was assigned for the oversight of the closure itself. It's during the oversight at the removal that the project managers have the opportunity to aid in the UST compliance section by ensuring the closure requirements are being followed and met. Project managers are stewards of the state fund and can approve budgets for the management of contamination if it's found, because UST closures can be an opportunity to remove contamination while the soils are accessible. And project managers also provide guidance for the collection of data that can assist us if the site becomes a remediation project. For things like ensuring confirmatory soil samples will represent the soils remained after excavation. We can collect groundwater if it's encountered. And we can remind folks to not to composite multiple soils together if they're slated for VOC analysis. These are just a few examples of what data can be helpful down the line. And for Alice's case, it did. Overall, the project is considered a success because it could have otherwise costed time filling data caps, costing more money, and a lengthy project lifespan. Next slide, please. We often share Alice's story as a case study in the UST Operator Training course because it demonstrates the best possible outcome if the site ever experiences a release. Operator training is not just a means of bridging the gaps between contractors, owners, consultants, and us. Since we started hosting classroom-style courses in 2010, nearly all of our new hires have attended. Other program inspectors and responders have built a knowledge of the UST rules enough to refer violations to the compliance section while they are out on their own field visits. It's quite often that Matt Jones gets a call or an email from someone in another section so that they can run something by him. And it's not just the referrals of violations that are important. We can also provide the public with a better service by keeping communications open between our sections. Next slide. Career expansion and employee retention is something that should always be encouraged. We have several advancements in which we are very proud, but here are just a few examples just to give you an idea. We've had an administrative staff member become a UST inspector. The head of our compliance section was once a spill responder and a UST inspector. And our very own bureau administrator was once a solid waste inspector before leading the spill response section. There is a lot of value to hiring within an organization and maintaining that institutional knowledge. Next slide. Another example of information sharing started when one of our project managers, Renee, had a project that in 2003 had a spike of MTBE in a monitoring well that was located near the UST system. The site had no documented release. No other constituents were present, so it seemed that we needed to reconsider the possibility that this was a vapor release and one from the stage 2 equipment. So don't forget that trends that we see as project managers and the time frames of when we see them can be information that the compliance section might find helpful. They could use it when they're drafting new rules for revisions in the future, or if it's something that's relative now, the UST inspectors can keep an eye out for that when they're out in the field. There is a nice article that was written by Gary Lind, and it was published in the Left Line, I believe back in 2004. We can get you the link if you're interested in reading more about that. That was an interesting thing to keep mindful of, is vapor releases as well. Next slide, please. transition of passing off a project from spill response to project managers is a more natural transition than, and we're most familiar with this, I'm sure. Our section leaders will assign project managers to shadow the spill responders in the field when they know that a project needs additional investigation and monitoring. I've had the pleasure of going out to shadow our responders, and it's a great way to see their response practices because their aim is to remedy the situation while limiting the impacts to human health and the environment. And it gives us a good understanding of the site beyond what would make it into the initial response action report. For some homeowners, they might be in a what do I do now kind of phase. So it's a good opportunity for project managers to meet the owner or the consultant and to put a personal touch in our customer service and set them on a path of seeking out fund eligibility requests or whatever else they might need. Next slide, please. Sometimes there's a surge in work or emergencies happen, much like what we're all experiencing now. So just remember, it's okay to reach out and see what resources might be available in your agency. Next slide. An example of this, we had a few years ago, we had a massive release that went into the river, and our spill response group was able to pull volunteers from our remediation section, since some of our project managers have consulting backgrounds. And that experience was able to assist the project overall in the responses and to help stabilize the problem, because there was enough to manage getting the responsible party to handle the other necessities of the site investigations that the environmental consultant would need to do to follow: the site characterization, soil, the groundwater sample collection, and whatever else needs to be considered. Ultimately, this collaboration helped the event. It was all because of the good communication. So just remember, it never hurts to ask. Next slide, please. When it comes to emergencies, it's always a good idea to practice. Spill exercises are a great way for people to get together to practice large-scale emergency response. Our spill response group organizes a drill exercise every year where everyone practices what it would be like to respond to an oil spill off the coast of New Hampshire. Next slide, please. This massive exercise is a collaboration of 30 agencies or thereabouts. NOAA, the Port Authority, the Naval Shipyard Response Team, private supplier companies get involved, Fish and Wildlife, Coast Guard, the Maine DEP, this local police and fire departments. All of these people are pooling in their resources and people to practice this and just get prepared. In my volunteering role, I got to throw various scenarios out to the crowd and to the groups. I was a character affectionately known as Becky. As I and others fed scenarios out to the group, they get to practice their responses and passing information up and down through the chain of command. It's always a good idea to get out there and practice, if not just to get the people together so that they can meet one another, get exposed to what we have out there, and to just have a good time. Next slide, please. So I urge you all to go out, shadow with your colleagues in all the different sections, share what you know, and often, so you can keep things fresh in your heads as you go about your own tasks. Leaders, encourage your staff to speak with other groups and see if a collaboration would aid in the project. Don't forget that the people in other sections are resources to aid in emergencies if need be. And practice those emergencies. Have a presence in drill exercises if there's any that go on in your section. Next slide. So keep up the good work, everyone. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out. And that's it for me. I look forward to the Q&A. Back to you, Drew.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Suzanne. A lot of cool success stories and case studies in there. And as Suzanne just said, as you see it on your screen there, please feel free to contact her offline with any questions or follow up for her. And as noted earlier, please continue to send off questions my way. I can see the questions are continuing to come in. So if you have any questions for Suzanne following her presentation. Send them in, and we'll work to get as many questions put out there for our panel as we can, time permitting, toward the end. So thanks again, Suzanne. And I'm happy to now hand it off to our next presenter, and a heads up to our next presenter. I think we're just a bit ahead of schedule, so that might mean a little more time to play with some of the, well, I won't be a spoiler. I'll let you take it from here, but might have a little more time for you. So I'm happy to go ahead and introduce our next speaker, Meredith Love with South Carolina DHEC.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Like he said, my name is Meredith, and I work for the people of South Carolina at SC DHEC's UST division. I also help lead our GIS initiative, and that's what I'm here to share with y'all. My hope is that you'll walk away with an understanding of how we use our UST internal viewer across our program to increase efficiency and streamline our job. So with that being said, I'm glad we have a little bit more time. Might be able to slow down some because I have a lot jammed into a quick presentation. So with that, you might be asking, or maybe you already know, what is GIS? So GIS stands for Geographic Information System, and it incorporates the science of geography to spatially represent data. So it plots data points on a map in a way that helps you spatially visualize your data. So as you can see on the screen, there's a screen grab from a zoomed in portion of our internal viewer. And it's zoomed in on Columbia, South Carolina. And so you can see kind of just a quick visual of our viewer. And like you said, I am going to do a live demonstration and kind of walk you through a quick scenario, but you're going to see more screen grabs just to give you a better idea of what I'm talking about. So you might be asking, why did you decide to do this? And so one of our coworkers, Catherine, came to the UST division with an extensive background in GIS. She saw our current data system and immediately began to visualize how GIS could be effective for our program. So EFIS is our current system, and it stands for Environmental Facility Information System. I'm sure y'all have something similar, but it is extremely outdated, and it doesn't really have a spatial awareness component. So it really lacks a visual understanding of our us and lus sites, especially in relationship to each other. So this is just a quick screen grab from a relationship or a release screen. You can see all the information, our permit number, facilities, project managers, addresses, etc. But this is as close as you get. There's no real visual component to it, and Catherine really valued that and knew what that could offer to our program. So she really spearheaded getting this involved and getting it into our program. So we are very grateful to her. So what she did is she worked with our GIS department to build what we call our UST internal viewer. And I'll explain later why we call it that, but just a quick disclaimer, Catherine nor I built this internal viewer. We are not GIS people necessarily. So I've just been really grateful to be able to take on the project and help push it. So we've worked with our GIS people at DHEC that built this for us. So I don't know a lot of the technical stuff, but I would love to help you get in contact with the right people if you're having questions like that. So we worked with our GIS division to really help build this project, and we had to ask the question, what were our needs? And that's where I got involved in the process. Catherine really wanted to evaluate what our needs for the application were, and she wanted to use the whole division so that everyone would be involved and have a say. So Catherine reached out to other project managers in our division, myself included, and asked what we would like to see in an internal viewer. And our division has 4 major sections. We have the regulatory and compliance, We have our assessment section, and then we have 2 corrective action sections, one that has a quality assurance component and one that has our field support component. And so we made sure to get input from people all across the division. So we knew that we wanted to display all of our UST and LUST locations, whether they were active, CNFA'd, so closed, or they were just permitted stations, so they didn't have any release. We knew we needed all of that location data. And we knew it was also important to show possible receptor locations, such as rivers, streams, water bodies, public water supply wells, and even private water supply wells. We also wanted geologic information, such as soil compositions, geologic formations, structural formations, because we knew this would be helpful in site characterization, all the way from the beginning in assessment to the end and closing out a site through corrective action. So we slowly have been adding layers to meet the needs of our colleagues, and we've continually had meetings and people have voiced their thoughts, and we've tried to continue to add things and better improve the internal viewer over time. In my demonstration, I'm going to create a storyline that kind of walks through a plausible step-by-step of a site in our program, showing how the internal viewer helps achieve our goals along the way. But I wanted to go ahead and give you a quick overview of the utilizations right now. So one of my favorite parts of the application is the Near Me tool. So what this does is it creates a 1,000-foot radius around a selected site. So you can select a site and it will draw that radius, and it will highlight all the layers that intersect the radius, including receptors. So this is extremely helpful if you're trying to understand the risk level of your site, or if you just need to go do a receptor sampling event. So we could easily print off this screen and hand it over to our field staff, and they would know exactly what receptors they're looking for, what other plausible sites are in the area, anything along those lines. So this is extremely helpful when it comes to receptors and knowing what you're going to need to sample. So as you can see, this is a screen grab of a site with that radius drawn. And you can see all the different sites and water bodies within this area. And then if you click, I'll show you later, but if you click on each of these, it'll actually highlight which water body it is with a distance attached to that. So you know exactly how far away that water body is from your site. So we also knew it was, we also knew that as we field a lot of phone calls and emails, because we are public service first and foremost. So we know we're going to be getting a lot of phone calls from the public, and a lot of them don't know permit numbers. So with FEs, it's easiest to just type in a permit number. But if you don't know the permit number, it gets a little hard. And there's a way to do it to figure out which site you're talking about, but this makes it so much easier because you can simply type in the address up here, and then it'll take you to that address and you can find whatever site they're talking about. And that gives you quick access to all of their historical files, and you can answer their questions in a much quicker manner. I can't express how much time this has saved simply in just answering phone calls and having all this information in one place. And I know that goes for across the board in our division. This also helps with filling in data gaps. If you have multiple sites, you know you probably have multiple wells. And so you know that you could put wells here, or you don't need wells here because you already have wells from this site. So it's such a helpful tool when it comes to that. So of course, there are definitely some obstacles when you're using 40-year-old data. The gold standard for location data is latitudes and longitudes. But unfortunately, about half of our sites that are majority older did not have lat-long coordinates. So over 8,000 points were geocoded using FEs. And geocoded is a weird word. I didn't know what it meant either until our GIS department really had to explain this with me. So if you have questions about this, email me, call me, we can talk more about it. But basically, what geocoding is here's an example of a site. Obviously, It's a very old site, probably from the 80s or 90s, but this site does not have lat-long coordinates. So when we push the data from the site into our internal viewer, it didn't have lat-long coordinates. So in lieu of those lat-long coordinates, GIS pulled the location data from the address. As you can see, the address of this site is Thickety Mountain, 5 miles west of Highway 11. And that does not accurately describe the location of this address, especially in a manner that our GIS application would understand a location. So the location point for this site was geocoded, which means just sent to the zip code. So as you can see in the internal viewer over here, here's what happens when you pull up a site. Here's the site number, the name, and it just put the latitude and longitude where the zip code is. So you can see that it says UST category geocoded not fixed, and the geocoded value is zip code. So it just geocoded and sent the location data to the zip code. And as you can see, there are 25 other sites that were sent to this specific zip code. So that's a major issue when over 8,000 of your sites are geocoded to random places. I mean, we had some in other states because the address wasn't even in the right state. So there's been a lot of rehab. So to address this issue, we've had a couple wonderful coworkers, Corey and Jamie, and myself every once in a while, working on verifying the locations of all of these geocoded sites to the best of our ability. So we have to look through all the historical files. Sometimes there's not files. You don't really know what to do. So they just do it to the best of their ability. So due to these inaccuracies, we call it the internal viewer. We value our data and the public, so we don't want to put out bad location data out there. So for the time being, we plan to keep this internal until we're able to really iron out all the kinks and the misplaced items. So before we get into the live demonstration, I wanted to go ahead and talk through some of our future hopes for what we want to do and how else we want to grow the application. So the first major one is we want to start weekly data pushes from our EFIs, Environmental Facility Information System, into the GIS application so that the data is automatically updated with the new sites or category changes after, say, like a site has been closed. We want that information to be pushed in so that the application automatically updates. Right now, because we've been verifying all of those locations and I've been trying to move, we can't push data in, otherwise all the locations will go back to where they were before. So as soon as we verify all those locations and we put them in the places we know we want them to be, we'll actually push those lat longs created through verifying the locations back into EFIs so that all of those sites that we have moved have correct lat longs as much as they can be. And then we will start doing weekly pushes of updates. So that's our one big major hope. Another one is to include a private water supply well location. We don't have a good layer for that, but water supply wells are some of our most prized receptors for protecting human health. So having them in our internal viewer would be extremely helpful. So we're hoping one day to figure out the best way to do that and have all of those locations in our viewer also. One day, and hopefully soon, we are hoping to include monitoring well location and sampling data. So what you see on the screen are two screen grabs from our field personnel's phone. Her name is Corey. And so eventually what we're hoping to do is, this is through the Art Collector app, and what she can do is go to a site, engage a well, and input all of that data into the form, and in real time, the project manager can go to the site and see that there is X amount of free product in this well on this site right now today. So that is a really awesome application to have some really cool implications for future work and just efficiency. And you can do the same with sampling. You can do all of your parameters when you sample, you know, the turbidity. You can input all of that into this, and just to know where all of your monitoring wells are on a site, and not having to look at a map that was made 20 years ago that might not be the most accurate. So we're really excited for that potential application. And the last one, in lieu of some of having every monitoring well location, we really are trying to add site maps into the application so that you could just click on a site and you could pull up the site map rather easily. It's not as hard, and I'll show you why, but that is one of our hopes. So with that, I want to go ahead and walk through the internal viewer, and I'm going to do a little live. If you have any information that, or have any questions that we don't get to in the Q&A, feel free to call me or email me. If I can't answer your question, I'll get you to someone else who can. And yeah, I'd love to chat with you more about how we do this. So with that, I'm going to take you to our internal viewer. So this is the first screen that you really see. It gives you a little information thing right when you pop up. You just click OK, and this is what it looks like. So I'm going to do some housekeeping tools real quick, just so you know what all of these things mean. So this is our help document. Catherine also made this to help quicken the training process. So you can easily just click on this and it'll bring up a document as a help document, and it'll tell you each of the things that I'm basically about to walk you through. So that's really effective if you forget what something does or how to do one little part of this. You have this document right here. This is our pictometry tool. We can't use it right now because we're too zoomed out, but I'll show you how to use it and a way to use it that's very effective once we get through the demonstration. But I love this tool. It is very effective in helping you understand distances between certain areas. You can measure an area, you can measure the height, you can click on different elevations. We have a topographic layer in there, but if you wanted a little bit more accurate, you could also use this. So this is a really great tool. This is our layers, so you can turn on and off layers as you want. As we're zoomed out, just kind of walk through, these are some of our structural features. This is our geologic formations, and here's our soil data. Sometimes the internal viewer is a little slow because there's just so much data in here already. So sometimes it's just a little slow, but we like to give it grace for that because it's working very hard for us. So those are some of the major layers. And as we zoom in, you'll see more of these. So this is the label. So if you forget what one label means, you can just pull this up. Right now, we only see our county lines. So as we zoom in, you'll see more layers, more labels pop up. And we'll go over here. This is the base map gallery. I really prefer imagery, but here we have multiple options for you to use. I'm going to go ahead and click imagery because I just like it better. This is that near me tool that's really cool, and I'll show you a couple of ways to use it later. But we have it fixed to 1,000 feet because that is how we determine our risk. We use a 1,000 foot radius, and that's our risk-based classification. But you can obviously pull it up or down, and it'll do however much you want, all the way up to 5,000 feet. But we just automatically set it to 1,000 foot because it can get a little nitpicky getting it exactly to 1,000 feet. So this is the draw tool. You can draw arrows, shapes. You can point to things here if you want to print something out and be like, hey, don't forget to sample this well, or here's a marker of this specific surface water location. So that's a really great tool. This is the editing tool. This is actually how we move sites that have been geocoded, and we're trying to move them to their correct position. So only a few of us have the permission to edit because we don't want to give out full reign to everyone all the time. So that's the editing tool. And this is our print button. So you can easily just take a screen grab, print it out straight from here, and take it out in the field with you, or give it off to your field personnel, or give it to regulatory, whatever you need. So these are basic Zoom features. Zoom in and you'll see more data load, all of the sites, and then you can zoom out. And then this button takes you back to the original Zoom extent. And then obviously here's the search engine. So with that, I'm going to walk through a very quick, just kind of demonstration of what a plausible, just step-by-step position of how we could use this internal viewer all the way through our division. So I am the project manager of York County for corrective action. York County is this beautiful county up here right near Charlotte. So a site there in York County is 093, wow, I can't type, 09390. So you just click in and it'll zoom in on the site. So this is York County. As you can see, this is the release screen that comes up, shows you your permit number, name, latitude, longitude, address, and the UST category. This is the link that I was telling you about that you could click, and it would take you to all the, well, I would have to sign in, but it would take you to all the historical files in that for this site specifically. So I could quickly pull up the AF3R report or the tier 2 or just a site map. So that's super helpful. You can also click to the next screen and it'll show you what county, the GIS website for that county, and all of the PMs and inspectors for this county. Yeah, so say I receive a report for Tangomar 09390, and it shows a random spike in ethanol that's never seen before on site. This is a site from, or this is a release from the 80s, so ethanol really shouldn't be here. And I know that this site has recently passed a compliance inspection, all that jazz. So I know there shouldn't be a release from here. So what I can do is simply pull up the internal viewer, come to this site and see what's around it. So I'm going to do the near me tool, and I'm going to type in 09390. And it's going to draw that radius for me. So there's that site, and it shows I have one active release, which is my site right here. It's highlighted. And then I have 2 other permitted stations. So permitted means there's never been a release before. So there's this one and there's this one. And it gives me the exact distances to those. And then there's obviously one of those geocoded, because you pretty much can't go anywhere without one of them being somewhere near your site. And then all the rivers and streams within this 1,000-foot radius. So if you click on it, it actually highlights the river that it's talking about and the exact distance. So you can go through and click, and it'll give you a name if it has one. As much information that this layer has, it'll give you. So I know that I have a random spike of ethanol in here. Doesn't make any sense. This tank has passed its compliance test for time, and for the demonstration, this tank is also at 09396, has also passed the compliance inspection. So now I'm a little fishy about this one. So I look at it, and I first look at elevation, right, to see if my site is up gradient or down gradient. So I see that these topographic lines show that down gradient or groundwater flow is in the direction toward this pond here, which makes sense. If I wanted to double check, I could use our pictometry tool. And so I would just click this location, and it would show my pictometry. I don't like this imagery. I'm going to do the latest imagery. And then I'm going to click our tools button and hit elevation. I'm going to start looking for elevations. So as you can see, the elevation is going to start going down as you get closer. Well, you can't see it because it's blocking, but elevation goes down as you go to the east. So that confirms that. So that's one really cool way to use your pictometry tool. So what I can do from there is send a suspected release memo to our regulatory and compliance. So I can take I can make a copy of my ethanol report, and I can take a screen grab of the viewer right here and say, this site is upgradient. Would you mind sending the inspectors to do an inspection? So the inspectors go out and say the permitted site 13149 fails the line tightness test, and the inspection also finds a cracked sump bucket. So of course we do soil samples, and there shows evidence of a new release. So our regulatory and compliance actually declares a new release at this permitted station, and it gets sent over to assessment. And while all that's happening, what the assessment person can do is go ahead and take a screen grab of this, send it to our field personnel, and ask them to go sample the new receptors and make sure there aren't any water supply wells. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my new radius around my site 13149. So I have a new radius, and you can see some of these houses I pulled in. I don't know whether there are water supply wells there. So I'm going to have Corey go double check and sample this stream and sample this stream, while also going and doing a receptor survey to make sure water supply wells aren't over here. And if there are, having her sample those. So when we get the data or the ability to input our monitoring well location and our sampling data, I could be able to click, oh, Corey took a sample from right here, and it tells me exactly where she got it sampled. And then I can go and look into our historical files document to see what the results were for that site. So then it gets obviously transferred to assessment. Our assessment personnel can come to this site and zoom in on the site and see, oh, there's another active release right here. So I'm going to go and click on this and see where this site has wells. Because if this site has wells over here and over here, I may not need to install other wells over here or other here. And I know I need to install a couple wells up gradient. I should probably install one over here to protect this stream. So this is just a really helpful visual to know where you might want to install and really fill in those data gaps. And it's really visual. It's much better than like having multiple maps on a table, trying to figure out what's actually happening and where things are. So after it's been fully assessed, and it's been perfectly assessed because of our UST internal viewer, it can go to me, back to the corrective action. So I might think, okay, let's just say there's a large amount of free product right in front of the islands right here. So what I could say is I'm going to look at 09390's AFER data. Was it effective? Was it not effective? And let's just say it's not effective. York County doesn't always have super effective AFERs, which are aggressive fluid vapor recovery events, if I needed to clarify that. And so say they're not super effective at this site, so I'm not probably going to do one at this site because it's probably going to have a similar effectiveness. So what I could do is say, oh, if the majority of the product is right here, it could be a good site for an excavation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my pictometry tool. I'm going to get out of this first so that. So I'm going to pull up my pictometry tool, set it right on this site. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So there's a truck right there. So I'm going to go back to the old latest imagery because I'm sure that's where I want to excavate. So what I can do is measure the area of a potential excavation right here. So I'm going to say this is where the wells are, and obviously Corey has filled in those gauging sheets, so I know exactly how much free product is where. And it's going to give me about a 700 square foot area for an excavation. So without even going out in the field, I have a good idea of type of excavation and AFER, all the best possibilities for cleanup. And this is really effective when it comes to our quality assurance. One, because we can say, hey, an AFER is being done at this site. Would you mind going out there and auditing them? So we can send a screen grab of the site and say, make sure to look out for this or for this. And they know exactly where they're going, what they're looking for. And it is very helpful. It's also helpful for new people. I've heard this overwhelmingly as I've been talking to some of our newer people. They've said that the internal viewer has helped them really get a grasp for their counties and for their projects. They know where things are, they have a better view of the major roads in their counties, where the majority of their sites are, where major water bodies are, where the clusters of water supply wells are. So it's really helped our new people, and really anyone, just get a better handle on their county and really get a visual that it would take hours to figure out on Google Earth. So I just can't express how much this tool, the UST Internal Viewer, has been helpful, especially when it comes to answering phone calls. So if I'm fielding a phone call from the public and they generally don't know the permit number, they're going to give me an address, and I can easily zoom to that address and figure out the site, and then click to historical files, quickly answer their questions. So instead of going around this wonky system of using our FEs. And so I just can't talk good enough about the UST Internal Viewer. I couldn't recommend it anymore, and we're excited to see what else we can do to make it for continual improvement and how to make it better. So with that, that is my demonstration. If you have any questions or calls or questions or concerns, just give me a call. I would love to talk with you. And with that, Drew, you can take it back.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Meredith, for the presentation and then the preview of the viewer. That was really neat. I did get a few questions in for Meredith as well. So we have ample time here for our panel to go ahead and do some questions. And let me go ahead and make a couple adjustments in order to facilitate that. Okay. So I'll encourage everyone out there, if you've been holding on to a question throughout the presentation today, whether it's for Kris, Suzanne, or Meredith there at the end, send them off now. We'll field as many as we can. And hopefully you gathered the contact info from the speakers as it came up. They've all encouraged you to reach out to them directly as well. If we don't get to your question today, or you can contact me and I'll put you in touch with them if I can't find an answer for you. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get some questions going. Okay, so I'm going to go back to, let me just say to the panel here, if you do, most of these are addressed to one of you individually, but if anyone on the panel wants to follow up, if they have something to add, feel free to do so. So let's start off with, so there's one for you here, Kris. Question, I guess the question is, do you have any experiences with heavy vapor aerosol testing?
All right. Can you hear me now, Drew?
Yes.
All right. I'm pretty sure they're talking about maybe the dry sump test method. It is being used in Pennsylvania. We haven't seen it being used extensively. We have seen a demonstration of it. So with any test, obviously there's pros and cons, but we haven't seen it enough to really get into the nuts and bolts of it. You know, is it allowed to be used? You know, it's manufacturer, as long as it's done in accordance with industry standard or independent testing laboratory, we're good in Pennsylvania.
Okay. Anyone else on the panel want to comment on that? I think Kris's assumption was right as far as what was meant by that question. Okay. All right, great.
Just
I had another
one
question
thing. Just one
Go
thing
ahead.
I'd like
Yep,
to add, just real quick with that, Drew, is whoever asked that question, I would certainly encourage them, think about, and we did the same in Pennsylvania when we were first approached to buy it. We certainly inquired about it, reached out to the individual involved with that test method, and actually wanted to see it in the field. We did so, as well as then address some questions, concerns that we had with the test method to try to better understand it ourselves before we just see a test report coming out. So regardless of what test method is out there, I would always encourage anyone to think about it, talk about it amongst your staff, formulate questions, reach out to the individual, get some answers, and then see it out in the field, as well as reach out to the testing community and get their thoughts and opinions who are actually using it. I think that's extremely helpful.
Great. Thank you, Kris. Let me jump over to Suzanne. So this is more of a comment, and Suzanne, you and I can maybe coordinate after the webinar today. So someone did say that they are definitely interested in the Lustline article that you had mentioned, and so you and I can link up to remember what date and what issue that came out in, and then I'll have a closing slide for the audience, a hyperlink to the Lustline archive. All the issues and all the articles are on New Epic's website, but I'll try to save you the pain of searching through the whole archive to find that article. So please get in touch with me or Suzanne. Yep, great.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Suzanne. So I did have another question for you, Suzanne. You'd mentioned operator training, and people from throughout the Bureau will sit in on UST Operator Training. Are there any are there any resources available online, kind of publicly accessible stuff that folks can access about operator training?
Well, we have all our schedules listed online, but I don't believe there are recordings of the UST training. It is a free class. So we've had a lot of people from other states have reciprocity, and we've had other people coming in from other states just to sit in on the class, but it is a classroom style. You might want to be in touch with me with an email. I can get you the contact information for the UST Operator Training Specialist now, who is Spruce Wheelock. He might be doing something different on terms of hosting training maybe online because of what's going on with the pandemic. Of course, they've been trying to collaborate, trying to find different ways to meet the training requirements. And I'm not too privy on those details, but I can find out for you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Let me jump over to Meredith. And I should have prefaced the Q&A if you all already answered the questions that, I was kind of navigating Q&A while questions came in and you were speaking. So if I'm reiterating something that you already covered, forgive me. So Meredith, the question for you is, I believe it's the GIS system, the viewer they're referring to. Does the system capture all the UST equipment info, such as tank and line install dates and the type of UST system that's installed and the ancillary equipment involved?
That's a great question and a really cool thought. I don't think it does right now, but I think we could. I feel we input everything from FEs, and so I'm pretty sure FEs has that information. So I feel like that would be an easy type of data push to push our tank information into the system. We have not done that yet, and I'm pretty sure, and I think that's a very cool idea to add that in there. So thanks for that.
Great. Thanks. All right, Kris, I'm going to jump back to you. It's kind of a longer one, so bear with me. So they're saying the question is, if a sump test fails a hydrostatic test and there is a considered suspected release, even if there was no product observed in the sump or the fittings were found to be tight. So the question is, so that's the scenario, and the question is, what's involved in the investigation that needs to be done within the 7 days?
Okay. So let's say you have I believe, Drew, the example that you used was it was a dry sump. There wasn't anything in it.
Right.
Upon coming to the site, let's say they do a hydrostatic test, the most common one. They fill it up and it fails. The tester at that time is trying to figure out, okay, where did it actually fail? And you can do that different bringing the water up incrementally and see where exactly is it failing. You know, is there a crack at the bottom of the sump? Is there a crack at the top? Is it a conduit issue that's failing? If you can't figure out exactly where it failed, obviously keep in mind these sumps are being tested for release detection purposes. So if you can't ensure that you have a sump that's tight, you can't perform release detection with it. So at that point, I mean, they may have to even look at an alternative testing method, maybe to get a better idea. You know, if it's not a hydrostatic test, maybe they use one of those other methods, a couple different of the vacuum test methods to try to make that determination. Do they pull some type of vapor samples from the backfill outside? And that's always the issue with containment sumps is in many cases, it's pea gravel. So it can be very difficult to grab some type of soil sampling associated with it. Do they do some limited soft dig around the outside of that containment sump and use a PID for some field screening to do some type of investigation? So, you know, each containment sump, and there's where the cookie cutter approach doesn't apply. You have to take a look in terms of the containment sump, the test method that's being used. Do you go with a different test method and try to determine? There's where it's good to understand the test methods involved. But then there's other avenues to go. You know, do you do a soft dig and PID screening outside the containment sump if there's no type of soil? Do you pull some type of vapor sampling associated with it? Are you getting anything? So there's a lot of different variables in play. So those are some of the things that I would discuss with the facility and the tester and the consultant to know, okay, what's going to best give me an answer and to satisfy that, where I can say to myself, okay, in most cases here, now I've determined there is nothing that got out.
All right, great. Thank you for the comprehensive answer there. Excellent. I'm going to jump back to Suzanne. Suzanne, do you have any advice on, maybe just from your experience in the Bureau, how staff could find out about spill or emergency response exercises in their state?
In my state or just in their own?
In their own state. So based on your experience, how they could go about finding out any mock scenarios in their state, like mock exercises?
It's usually the best advice is just to get out there and start talking with people. You can always talk to some of the section leaders and ask and see if there's something in place that they may not know about. In New Hampshire, our volunteer program kind of is open and encouraged to everybody in our division, because if we happen to have an emergency, we all could potentially get called out to assist. So they like to encourage us to partake in it at least once or at least often also, so that you can keep those things fresh. Sometimes people have other skills that are helpful and they wind up volunteering each time, and that's their own choice. For example, we have a whole team of GIS people, and they're all in communications throughout the year, just trying to make sure they have the right equipment, make sure that equipment is mobile, make sure it's up to date with what we need and what our resources would be if we happen to have to go out and make it work. So our volunteering is kind of already in the lines of communication, but if you don't have those, I would just start asking around and say, hey, I kind of just want to volunteer. Do you know of any other programs that are out there that we might not know about? We want to just get people exposed to what these other programs are so that they can try to get some cross-training or whatever those benefits are that you think your folks could utilize. Awesome.
And that actually sets up, thanks, Suzanne, that sets up a good question I have here for the whole panel. And maybe you don't have an answer on this, but kind of the opposite of today's presentation. So for all of you, have any of you had experience with whether it's a person, or, you don't have to be specific, a person or a section in your state that's not open to cross-training and collaboration? And if so, how did you or were you able to kind of break down those silos, break down those barriers to improve that situation? Any examples?
Hey, Hey, Drew, this is Kris. I'll just give our own example. For Pennsylvania, obviously our program storage tanks, I already said, we're broken down into prevention, corrective action, and insurance. But I would say in some cases, you'll always have those programs or departments or sections that are very isolated from each other. They know what they do very well, but they're not sure what the other side does. For instance, maybe an underground storage tank individual isn't aware of above ground storage tank requirements, or maybe someone in the registration section isn't aware of modification reports that maybe get submitted, or 30-day closure notifications. So remember, I would always keep in mind that always remember an individual from the public when they call in and they speak with, in this case, Pennsylvania DEP or the regulatory agency. To them, you're not a person just in the underground storage tank section or the registration section. You are the DEP or the DEQ or whatever the agency is. So they're looking for an answer, and the more that you know across all programs, the better that image is of the regulatory agency going to be to the public. So I would encourage everyone to just try to step outside your little comfort zone and learn about the other programs. A lot you can learn.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Kris. And obviously, I mean, Suzanne's presentation was one example of breaking down barriers as far as the emergency exercise. But Suzanne or Meredith, any follow-up to what Kris was saying there?
That was a good one, what Kris had answered, but could you sum up the question one more time for me, Drew?
Yeah, sure. So without being too specific as far as individuals, do you have any experience with a person or a section that's not open to cross-training collaboration? And if so, how did you, or do you have an example of how you're able to break down those barriers?
That is a good one. I'm trying to think of examples. I suppose the best thing is just to keep mentioning it to folks, maybe during your discussions with leadership, with your own supervisor, see what they think. Hopefully they're on board with using a little bit of time. Usually a lot of leadership has a concern of how much time you might be spending on something, so maybe try to find some sort of a middle ground, find out what their concerns are. If it is time, maybe you can do it outside of hours. If it's volunteer work, something like that, you might be able to find some sort of a middle ground. I don't have examples to give you, but I would say keep at it, keep bringing it up so that people can hear that there is an interest. Because if it's just people falling silent, then sometimes folks don't know that there's an interest out there. So the more you talk about it, the more it comes up, the more it might make it up the ranks, the more they might try to accommodate the fact that people are interested in learning about other programs and getting out there and maybe expanding their career and whatnot. So I would just say keep speaking up and keep talking to people. It couldn't hurt to just show that there's an interest out there or that there might be a need.
Great.
Yeah, I think, this is Meredith, I think when, in my particular case, it's never been a lack of unwillingness, or it's never been because of unwillingness, it's been because of time or just forgetting about it because it's not as high as a priority as other things. So I think when we've tried to implement cross-training, we've just set out specific times, specific dates, sent emails, and just been very clear in communicating when and where these things are happening. Because it's never, for me at least, it's never been a lack of, or just like not wanting to cross-train. It's just been creating time to do that and making it a priority.
Sure. Great, good perspectives from all of you. Let me stick with you here, Meredith. So zooming back into a very specific. So back to your when you set the radius and you kind of zoomed in on the GIS viewer. Are you able? So when you set the radius to include release information, well information, other data you're interested in, are you able to print that screen and then also have the data put into a table and print the table of information?
That's a great question. So you can definitely print any screen however it looks. So if you create a radius, if you highlight specific receptors or permit numbers and draw things, all of that will print. So whatever is on the screen will be printed. So yes, when it comes to making a table, I'm not quite sure. This has been a part of wanting us to create our site maps with it. So we've thought about creating a form that would turn into like almost a PDF of the site map. So you could click the site, which would be really interesting if we could tabulate that and almost make it into a table like you were saying, with a site map and everything. That's a very interesting thought. I'm sure we would have the capabilities to do that. I don't think we can do that right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And then sticking with you, Meredith, I actually had a couple people ask this question kind of in different wording, but the question is, what type of data or maps do you make available to the public, if any?
So all of our information is available through the FOI office, so our Freedom of Information. And so you can simply request anything from them and they can give you maps, or even if you were to email or call us and say, hey, can I get a map of this? We would gladly give that to you. So we're just not putting the viewer out to the public. So there's no real GIS viewer layer out there for the public to see, but we would, like, anybody can come and access our information if you go through the FOI office or contact us, from my understanding.
Great. Okay, thank you. So back to you, Kris. So the question is, would sampling be required for the replacement of a tank top or a UDC when they're replaced?
In terms of the dispenser, we view dispensers sumps. If you're replacing actual dispenser, if major modification, excavation at the dispenser end is actually considered a partial system closure in Pennsylvania. So sampling would be required. For a containment sump on top of the tank, that would not be considered a partial system closure in Pennsylvania, therefore would not apply to the closure guidance document. But in both cases, we would require certified individuals that we actually certify to be on site, and they are required to report to us any type of even suspected contamination associated, whether it be an odor or stained soil, and report that to our local regional offices. So in the cases, though, of like the dispenser sump, where that is a partial system closure because you would be doing a major modification underneath the dispenser, in those cases, if you do encounter nothing but pea gravel, there are situations where you need to immediately notify then the local regional office of DEP and then inform them what you're experiencing, what you're going down, because obviously you can keep digging and digging, but we don't want to get crazy here. And you need to tell us, okay, what are you seeing? Are you now 6 feet down and you're still in nothing but pea gravel, but you have not encountered any type of stained soil or odors to date? Or are you seeing some type of odors or stainage going on when you're doing that? But so there's a difference between the tank top containment sump and the dispenser sump. Dispenser, underneath the dispenser, you're doing excavation. Underneath the dispenser, we would consider that partial system closure of that dispenser, as well as then containment sump that does not fall within that realm.
Okay, great. So this next question, it kind of follows, I guess we'll start with Suzanne and I'll open it to the panel. I think you already answered this, Suzanne, but I'll start with you. So the question is, in your state, do you require LUST staff to take UST Operator Training?
I think it's encouraged. It's not required. And fortunately, we've had an excellent turnout ever since we've done training. We make it very easy for folks. we try to make it fun. We usually tease people and say, oh, you have to take the exam at the end. And not everybody takes the exam. Sometimes people just take the information and just sit in on the training. We've even had people who have been with the agency for a long time sit in on training just to get a refresher, get exposed to it. We have a lot of compromised equipment on stage so that people can get a sense for what we're seeing, like the ethanol compromised piping. We have a piece of that all wrapped up so that people can come and see it and just get an idea of what they might be looking for at their sites, or just to be exposed to something different. It is a day long. It's a little harder sometimes.
Great. Other panelists want to comment? Do you require LUST staff to take operator training?
This is Meredith. We do. It is a part of our training system. It's one of, after our QAP, it's like one of the next things that you have to do, and you watch the presentation, you can look through the quizzes, etc. So it is a required part of our training.
In Pennsylvania, we do not, Drew. We have third-party vendors that do the operator training in Pennsylvania that we approve their courses. So we as a state do not do the Class A or B operator training.
Thank you. I had a comment someone just shared. In New Mexico does have online operator training. It's likely other states do as well. Let's see here. And I just wanted to put out there, so I've got about another 20 minutes or so on my clock, maybe 17 or 18 minutes left as far as panel Q&A. So if there's a question you want to ask, please fire away. I do have a few more left here, but we do have ample time to field a few more with this great panel. So please use the questions feature and send me a question if you have one. So back to, let's see. So I have one for you, Meredith. Let's see. So do you share the internal viewer with other programs? So whether NIPTES, for instance, this person says their internal viewer lists all programs, interests, and sites across almost all the programs. We don't have private wells, but we have both community and non-community public water sources. Any feedback on that?
So we have a big internal viewer for what we call just our contaminated sites. That is very basic information from different dry cleaners, etc., and UST, LUST, like LUSTs. So we do have a bigger internal viewer with a little bit smaller data. We don't use that as much. If one of our other sections wanted to have the internal viewer, we'd probably give access to them, but we haven't actively shared it with them, to my belief or knowledge. So we do have like a larger contaminated sites viewer, but for UST specifically, we haven't necessarily shared that with other programs. I don't think we would be against it, with obviously the disclaimer that all locations are not correct. But yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it does. And feel free, anyone who's asked the question, feel free to just send a follow-up if I'm only reading what I'm sent or interpreting what I'm sent. So if there's a follow-up to that, please send it away. I'm going to stick with you, Meredith. You might have gotten the lion's share of questions, since you did the cool viewer there. So this is kind of I'm combining two here. So one, you might have answered this, but do you enter sampling results from monitoring wells into the UST internal viewer? And then as a follow-up, more generally, how do you motivate staff in the agency to enter or update GIS data from their sites? Are there any tips or tricks that, I guess one, is that a challenge, and two, do you have any tips or tricks as far as encouraging them to do that?
Yeah, so we actually don't input sampling data into the viewer. Maybe that's a data and just there being too much, that would be way too much data into the viewer. But We don't do that. What we do have is that quick access to our historical files, so you can pull up the historical data for any site pretty quickly. And what was the follow-up question? Sorry, Drew.
Yeah, I combined. I made a mess of a combined question there, but how do you, is it challenging to motivate staff? Are there issues with staff entering and updating GIS information from their sites, or are there things you do to encourage them to do that, to remind them to do that? Is it a challenge? Is it an issue?
Gotcha. So they actually don't do any updating unless they are on our editing staff. And if they're on our people who actually are verifying the locations of those 8,000 sites that we don't have accurate data location for, then they don't have editing privileges and they don't really edit anything in the internal viewer. What we did have was to kind of chunk out some of those 8,000 geocoded sites. What we did originally is some of those were even some of our active release sites. So we gave each section 2 weeks to go into the internal viewer and correct their own active releases. So I went in to York County, and any geocoded site that was one of my active releases, I actually edited the location of it because we know the site best. We know where the potential source of that release was. And so we actually gave 2 weeks for each of them to do it. And honestly, at that point, I think it was a little bit of like some starstruck. So people were kind of excited to move some sites around and do some fun things. So since then, but then we closed it, and so they don't have editing privileges anymore outside of the people that are specifically working on the sites that are still geocoded. And then after we have all those areas geocoded, we're going to do weekly pushes from our FEs into the internal viewer. So actually that'll be automated to update whether this site has been closed, whether this site, there's a new release here. So that will actually be an automated system. So our project managers will not have to do that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So this next question, I'll put it out there for the whole panel. It's a little general, but we'll see if you can answer it or provide an example. Can any of you recommend a phone app? I guess it's like a mobile app that's useful for scientific sampling. So I know specifics on what sampling that is, but recommend a phone app that's useful for that scientific sampling?
No, I don't know of any.
Yeah, I was just going to say for ours, when we go out and sample and collect parameters and we're wanting to input that data into the internal viewer, there's an app called Art Collector, and you can build forms through the internal application of GIS and build forms that will be on your phone through the Art Collector app.
All right, and I see Spruce Wheelock from New Hampshire DES is on. Suzanne had mentioned his name, running operator training there. So if you don't have Spruce's contact info, you can reach me or you can reach Suzanne, and we'll get you in touch with him if you have questions about operator training in New Hampshire. So I'm just going to leave it open for another minute here. Final chance to get in a question for any of our panelists or for the whole panel. So I'll give it another minute, and hopefully we do get some more since we have time. I'll wait. I did get one in for you, Meredith. Are you able to elaborate on how you get real-time monitoring well data?
So we haven't actually implemented the system yet, but what we're hoping to happen is Corey would be out in the field, our field staff, I use her name because she's one of my friends. So Corey would be out in the field and she's using that art collector app. And so if you remember back in my slides, or if you pull up the slides presentation at the end of on our hope slide, there was 2 screenshots that showed the app, and it showed a form. And so that form could be filled out, like the gauging info could be filled out, and it would say this well for this site, whatever specific site data you wanted, you could input into that form. And then you could also say had X amount of product, and then you would hit something like a submit button, and then that would be automatically uploaded into the GIS application. And so then I could go into the internal viewer from my office and zoom into my site, and we would see that monitoring well location information and gauging data. Does that make sense? Well, I guess you didn't ask the question, but I hope that makes sense.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and the person says thank you, so I think it did make sense. All right, well, with that, we've come to the end of the presentations and the Q&A for today. I'd like to put out a huge thank you to Kris, Suzanne, and Meredith for your hard work and coordinating this and planning your presentations, and for presenting today, and then for sticking around for Q&A. I think it was a great little roundtable Q&A there. Also want to thank everyone who's been involved with the National Tanks Conference webinar series this year. That's our partners in the states and tribes, folks at EPA's Office of Underground Storage Tanks, and SWMO. Thanks so much for helping plan this webinar, and we've got a couple more planned for later this year. Anyone interested in luft cleanup,